You ever hear someone say something and immediately feel like that's not really what they meant? Not in a dramatic way, not something obvious you can point to, just a small shift, something subtle, something most people would completely miss. Maybe a pause that came a second too late, maybe a tone that didn't quite match the sentence, maybe the way they said, "I'm fine," sounded controlled instead of natural, and somehow, without even trying, you pick up on it. And once you notice it, it sticks. It doesn't just pass through your mind like normal conversation. It stays there, like something unfinished that your brain keeps returning to. Even if you try to ignore it, there's still that quiet feeling that something didn't fully add up. And it's not loud. It doesn't interrupt the moment. It just sits there quietly, in the background of your awareness. Because for most people, a conversation is straightforward. They hear what's said, they respond, and they move on. But for you, it doesn't stay at that level. Your brain doesn't just process the words, it checks them, compares them against tone, timing, expression, and context. And when something doesn't fully align, even slightly, it stands out. And now, instead of one version of the conversation, you're holding two, what was said, and what it felt like underneath. And that second layer doesn't disappear. It stays active, even when everything else moves on. And the moment that split happens, your experience changes. Because now you're not just listening anymore. You're interpreting, tracking patterns, noticing inconsistencies, picking up on things that weren't directly stated. And your brain starts building a second version of the interaction beneath the surface. And even while you're still responding normally, part of your attention stays there. Almost like you're running two conversations at once, one outside and one inside your head. So a simple interaction doesn't stay simple. Someone says one thing, but your brain registers something else. And now there's a quiet tension between the two. Not something you react to immediately, but something you can't ignore. And that's what makes even small moments feel heavier than they should. Because what should feel clear now feels open. And your mind keeps circling that openness, looking for something to close it. That's why it shows up in subtle but consistent ways. Like when someone says they're okay, but something feels off. Or when someone agrees, but their tone doesn't match. Or when someone laughs, but the timing feels slightly forced. And even if you don't say anything, you notice it. And once you notice it, it stays longer than it should. And sometimes, you don't even know why it lingers. It just does. And the strange part is, you're not trying to do this. You're not actively analyzing people. It just happens automatically. Your brain constantly scans for patterns, for alignment, for consistency, and when something doesn't match, it flags it instantly. You don't choose to notice. You just do. And once it's noticed, it doesn't get undone. If you've ever had a moment where you picked up on something small like that, something no one else reacted to, think about it and drop it in the comments. Because once you notice this pattern, you realize how often it happens and how normal it feels. Once you become aware of it, most people would call this intuition or say you're reading too much into things. But it's not random. It's pattern recognition. Your brain compares multiple signals at once, and when they don't align, it notices instantly. It's not guessing, it's detecting. Your brain doesn't just hear words, it evaluates them, cross-checks tone against content, timing against intent, expression against meaning. And when everything lines up, it moves on. But when something doesn't, it pauses and keeps it active, like something unfinished, waiting to be resolved. And once your brain holds on to something like that, it doesn't disappear. Even if you try to ignore it, your brain has already stored it, and it keeps returning to it in the background, quietly, but repeatedly, almost like it's asking, what was that? So now every interaction exists on two levels: the surface, what was said, and the underlying, what it felt like. And even when you're engaging normally, you're aware of both, and that awareness changes how everything feels. And this is where things feel heavier, not overwhelming, just more dense, because every interaction carries more information than it seems, and your brain processes all of it. Nothing just passes through. Everything leaves something behind. So part of you is present, listening and responding, while another part is observing, analyzing, comparing signals, And that split can make even normal interactions feel more complex, like you're inside the moment and slightly outside of it. And because of that, responding becomes harder, not because you don't know what to say, but because you're responding to more than one thing: the words, the tone, the mismatch, and the meaning behind it. So even simple responses take more processing than they should. So sometimes you say less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're still processing, still deciding what the interaction actually is. And by the time you figure it out, the moment has already passed, and you're left with something unfinished again. From the outside, this can look like distance or disengagement, but internally, you're more engaged than most people, just in a way that isn't visible. You're not less present, you're processing more. And this doesn't stop when the conversation ends, because later, your mind goes back, replaying what was said, re examining what you noticed. And that's when you start seeing more details and interpretations. Things that didn't stand out before start to make more sense afterward. Not because you're stuck, but because your brain is still processing, still working through that second layer, trying to complete something that didn't settle in the moment. Your mind doesn't like unfinished patterns. And over time, this becomes exhausting. Not because of the conversations themselves, but because of everything underneath them: the constant pattern recognition, comparison, and awareness of things that aren't said directly. It's not the moment itself, it's everything your brain adds to it. So even small interactions don't stay small. They expand, linger, and come back late, turning quick moments into something your mind keeps working on. And that's where the weight builds. But this doesn't come from overreacting. It comes from awareness, from your brain detecting patterns most people don't notice. You're not imagining it, you're seeing more. Most people take conversations at face value and move on, but you don't. You look underneath, you process more, and that changes how everything feels. You don't just hear things, you interpret them. And once your brain works like that, nothing feels completely simple anymore. Even casual interactions carry depth and meaning, and that meaning stays with you longer. The problem isn't that you notice too much. It's that your brain treats everything as something to understand and resolve. Everything becomes something to figure out. So even small inconsistencies become something your mind returns to, not because you want to, but because your brain keeps going. So the shift isn't to stop noticing because you can't. That's how your brain works. It's in what happens after you notice. It's to stop assuming everything needs an answer. Not every signal needs to be explained or resolved. Some things can stay incomplete. Next time you notice something subtle, instead of asking what it means, ask whether it actually needs meaning. Let it exist without chasing it. And that's where things start to feel lighter. So if conversations feel heavier than they should, if you notice things others don't, if you read between the lines without trying, it's not because something is wrong. It's because your brain processes more than what's visible. You're not overreacting. You're processing deeper. And that ability isn't always easy to carry, but it's also what allows you to understand people on a deeper level. So if this felt familiar, consider subscribing, because this is exactly what we're going to keep breaking down. Because once you understand this, it stops feeling so heavy.